Okay. The study for today is, I think, a really critical one. Well, they're all critical. Okay, they're all critical. Um, you're reading the Bible, and like most people, when they start reading the Bible, they don't know exactly where to start. We'll usually tell people, okay, read the Gospel of John. Okay, now there's a reason why we say the Gospel of John, and then we'll suggest the book of Romans. A lot of people will start off from, they figure just like any other book, start off in Genesis and then read all the way through to the book of the Revelation. And some people, they want to just jump to the Revelation because that's exciting for them. I want to know the future, I want to know the end times. And but the Bible is really it's really a library of books. And a lot of people don't know that. Some people, they sort of figure out, oh, it's a collection of books. You got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, etc., right? And they see this, they begin to see it as a collection of books, but it's got an organization to it, which we went over on another lesson on previous pages, that goes through and talks about how it's divided into history or in poetry and the prophets, and then you've got the biography of Jesus Christ in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then you have, you would think John, which is another gospel, would be another biography, but it's not. It is an argument against a particular philosophy that denied Christ, that was growing back in that day. And then you got the wonderful doctrinal books of the Apostle Paul, and how he lays out an understanding of all the Old Testament, how it fits into the theology of the New Testament, and then you end up with the Revelation. Once you know that, once you can compartmentalize, you can start to see the organization of the Bible. But people will maybe they'll read a verse here, a verse there. I like it when people get one of the devotional books that we have, The Call to Glory, and it's got a little Bible reading passage that goes with it and a little explanation of a principle. That's good. It's good for daily devotions. But there's different ways that we tell people to read the Bible sometimes too. Like, I'll suggest, do read the Bible straight through, or maybe even in an organized way. Like my Bible reading for today was, let's see. Let me get my Bible. My Bible reading for today was 1 Kings chapter 5, 2 Chronicles chapter 2, and then 2 Thessalonians 3. And as you are learning the names of the books of the Bible, it should come to your mind, oh, this one's in the Old Testament, and this is in the New Testament. Okay? And that's one way that one should read the Bible. Just by reading it through, and then reading it through again, and then doing that over the years, you will get a familiarity with the Bible. Already, as you're looking at the names of the books of the Bible, you should be able to say, okay, on a Sunday morning, oh, okay, I'm going over here. And you won't have to look at the table of contents, because you'll have just a feel for the Bible. In fact, because I, am using the Bible heavily, I go through one of these every few years. It's starting to wear out now, okay? I do not make notes in my Bible. Some people do, and that's a good idea. I keep all my notes in my head because I'm going to set this Bible aside when it starts to wear out and it starts to fall apart. Somebody has said the person who has a Bible that's falling apart is generally not falling apart themselves. Okay, why is your Bible falling apart? Because you're using it a lot. Okay, so some people, they'll read, a verse from here, a verse from there, maybe a passage from here and there. And I'm glad that they're doing that. But the more organized you get, the more you get the general framework of the Bible. As you're using it, you will remember, as you read over and over again, you will remember that a passage that you're looking for is on the right side of the page. You'll say, let me see, where was that? Let me see, it was over here, but it was on the right side of the page. And you'll have that kind of memory that's going to go with it because of your familiarity with the Bible. And the trouble is, you're teenagers, and so you haven't had a whole long time to be able to be reading. So you're at the beginning of your reading schedule, and you will get there. Is that not so, Brother Joe? Am I describing, when you think of a passage, you think of an actual position on a page where it would be?
I think of that, and I think of the chapter in the context.
Yes. So it all comes together. Now, as you start to see how the Bible is laid out and the organization of it, you will also be connecting a logical flow of argumentation. Okay, you'll have you'll not only think of a passage, you'll think of it, and he just said it, in the context that is surrounding it. If you say minor prophets to me, the first thing I think of is preparing for the Messiah to come the first time. And that's what I'm thinking from the minor prophets. Now, there's other stuff in the minor prophets too. If I'm thinking of really anything from Genesis up to Esther, I'm thinking of the context of Israel and the history of Israel. If I think of the Proverbs, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is I've got to read every single one of those verses very carefully and very thoughtfully. It's one of the slowest books in the Bible for me because I'm reading and thinking, okay, now what does this mean? And then right the next verse, you got to think about it all over again. Okay. So as you get that feel for the Bible and as you get it organized, it will impact your understanding of the Bible. One of the things that I'm thinking also about the Bible is that the guys that were writing it did not necessarily, in fact, very probably did not know that they were writing the Bible. Okay, I can imagine that Isaiah and Jeremiah, okay, they might have had some idea that they were writing down the prophecies that God was giving them, okay, but that it would be added to the Bible, I don't know what they would have thought. Did Moses think that he was writing the Bible at the time when he did Genesis through Deuteronomy? One of the earliest scriptures is the book of Job. Job had no Genesis to go by. He had no Deuteronomy. He did not have the law to think about. He didn't have the gospel in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. However, in Job are some of the strongest statements about Jesus Christ. Yeah. Job wrote Job. Okay. And it's always fun. I always listen for it when somebody says job. Okay. Which is what I did too. Okay. But we pronounce it Job. When I was translating, this book has been translated into Spanish, and we got to do the cleanup on it right now. But when I was sending it through the translator to work on it, I noticed I was referring to the book of Job, and it said, now see if you can get this. Trabajo. You know what trabajo is? Okay, it's a job. It's work. Okay, you go to your job, and so it's translated not as a person, Job, but translated as the word work. But anyhow, as you see things in the context of the whole scriptures, it becomes richer to you. Job had nothing to go by. Did he know that he was writing the Bible, I wonder? I really tend to doubt it, unless if maybe God did let him know. But he didn't say that he got that message from God. But we have the benefit of putting it all together right now. Okay, so we talked about, at the top of page 55, the grammatical historical method. That is the way to start interpreting and understanding the Bible. You look at the grammar. What does it say? Which is why I say it was important that you guys should have been having good grammar when you were in school. If you didn't, you should get good grammar. Did you study grammar in school? Nouns and verbs and subjects and predicates? Okay, good. Okay, those things are important because just like you're writing computer code, the way it's written out is important. You have to get the syntax exactly right. Same thing with grammar. In fact, it is the exact same thing as with grammar, so that you can get the syntax right for when you're studying and when you're writing and when you're doing everything. So the grammatical historical method we said was important. The allegorical method on page 54 we talked about the last time. And that's where people read into the scriptures whatever they want to, and just, they take liberties that they shouldn't be taking. Okay, so we come down to this next controlling thought. Hello? We're upstairs. Okay. So the next organizational principle for being able to organize the Bible is going to be the dispensational overall message of the Bible. Dispensations. Very important thing. John? Oh, we're downstairs in the same room we were the last time. Right over, no, back here. There you go. Did you bring your book? I'm running out of books to loan. Okay, he brought his book. He just got a book. So if you're going to take a nice $26 book, you got to honor it and come the next time. Okay. Okay, so dispensationalism, and you're catching up with, I'm getting into the meat of the lesson right now, so you didn't miss too much. Other parts were a little bit of review. Okay, this is a real classic book, Dispensationalism Today, by Charles Ryrie. That's a good one to pronounce. Okay. You'll notice it's got the inscription of Pastor Harry E. Vickery. Pastor Vickery was my pastor for a while when I was going to church in New York City, when I was in Bible college. He has passed on. He's been gone for a number of years at this point. Yes, he did. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And this is a classic book, Dispensationalism. As church history went on, it's been, I guess, really in these last couple of hundred years at this point, what's going on? Well, maybe not quite that, maybe 150 years, that dispensationalism really developed. It's kind of like when you want to interpret history, history is always easier to look at when it's in the past. When you're making history, you might not know that you're really making history. You might not know that you're really making a difference. But it's always easier to see how things are organized in the past. You can start to put things together and see how things developed. There is a thing called covenant theology, where they look at the covenant that God made with Abraham, the covenant that he made with Adam, the covenant that he made with Isaac and Jacob. And this was God's promise to these guys, promises to Israel, that Israel was going to last, which means it is not a good idea to go against Israel. And all these countries that are gone up against Israel and tried to persecute the Jews, they've been swept into the dustbin of history. Okay, think of Hitler, prime example. But you have, many other countries that did the same thing. This is important. Why we, as a country here, why it's so very important for the stand that President Trump has made to support Israel. President Biden was not supporting Israel, okay, and was undermining what Israel was doing, and not a smart move. Look at Hamas right now. They're another group that's being swept into the dustbin of history. Okay, they thought they could go out on October 7th a couple of years ago and go out and attack the Jews and just really brutalize and perverse stuff that they were doing as well. And Hamas is getting destroyed. Okay, Hamas will be gone. Okay, Iran right now is going against Israel. They've been going against Israel. Iran is in big trouble today. That country, they are having such protests that it's like the fourth wave of protests, and they're in such trouble that they might have an overthrow of the Muslim government of Iran. I'm sorry?
They might have to.
No, that would be where you had Christian countries, which they shouldn't have done, okay, going out to fight a religious war. No, this is an uprising within the country. And it's probably God's judgment on the country. But we'll see what happens to Iran. This morning, there's been a lot of drug boats running out of Venezuela, and President Trump said, "No more. We're not going to allow for this." And he's been shooting them out of the water.
The drugs, the bad drugs?
The bad drugs, yeah, the illegal drugs. The drugs, yeah, it's a good thing, yes. And then because Venezuela was doing oil shipments, Venezuela has a lot of oil. They were doing oil shipments and that were illegal because we have sanctions against different countries as pressure in the world. Well, they've seized these oil tankers and said, no, you can't go. And so it's been a problem to Venezuela. Did you hear this morning that President Maduro was captured? Yeah. They had a warrant for the arrest of Maduro, the president of Venezuela. Who knows what's going on over there? Yeah, really? Okay, yeah, that is amazing. I'm thinking to myself, boy, is that a big thing. So the point is that as you're looking at the stuff going on in the world, in theology, they like to think of it as an issue of covenants, that God had this one promise. Now, what happens when you have covenant theology? It's not terrible theology in certain ways, but what they'll do is say, well, the church has taken the place of Israel, so forget Israel. Okay, Israel's no longer a country anymore, no longer a people. God's not working with the Jews anymore because now we have the church instead. And so whatever promises were made to Israel, the church has inherited those promises. And so one of the things they had for Israel, they would have as part of a sign of the covenant was circumcision, male circumcision. And so they said, well, okay, we're not going to circumcise, use that as a covenant sign. We'll replace it with baptism. And so they said, we circumcised the kids when they were young, when they were babies. So now we're going to replace that with baptism for babies. And remember the lessons I've taught about baptism, you have to believe with all your heart before you're allowed to get baptized. So you see what covenant theology did when they said the church takes the place of Israel and we're going to have baptism now for infants. Bad move. This is coming from covenant theology.
They reconcile the fact that only Jews have the population.
Right, yeah. Okay. Although we the covenants are significant because God is going to reestablish Israel. Well, God has reestablished Israel, and in the tribulation, the Antichrist is going to try to go against Israel specifically and try to undo that. God's going to come down and wipe out the Antichrist and his forces, and we get to fight alongside of Christ to do that. So that is the significance of Israel. However, okay, dispensationalism takes a different approach for understanding the Bible. Okay, so as it says here on the bottom of page 55, not only is it important to consider the inner workings of the Bible text in a grammatical, historical way, we're breaking down the grammar and breaking down the syntax of the Bible code here. It's also important to consider the text in the overall message of the Bible. Okay, even though the Bible, as you would read here in the text, even as the Bible is made up of different books, they still have a unified message. This is where dispensationalism is going to come in. First, before we get to dispensationalism, we want to think about, on page 56 there in bold print, progressive revelation. God gave the Bible a little bit at a time here and a little bit of a time there. In that movie that we saw on Wednesday night, I think some of the one of the things that I thought was very important, remember Lee Strobel, he went to the one guy and he was asking about the testimony. He said, well, you have all these women who testify about Christ. And it's all over the place. It says this Mary here, a different Mary there. Okay, I've got a book on the life of Christ that I wrote also. Okay, maybe that's for another day. But in it, I break down, okay, all those different testimonies and how they actually fit together like a puzzle. However, one of the things that he said was that these Bible writers, they were not writing down a script that they went over and over again to make it all work together. Okay, that's when somebody's writing a movie, they're putting together a movie text or whatever, the plot of a movie. They have all these different things. They have to go over things over and over again to make it all fit together, to make all the lines work. One of the things that'll happen in movies is because they're shooting a scene like a number of times, maybe 10, 15 times, they've got to keep things unified. So that, let's say you start shooting a movie scene at 9 o'clock in the morning, and there's a clock on the wall, and it reads 9 o'clock in the morning. Well, you're going to reshoot the scene because you're going to do it from another angle, okay? And the clock says 10 o'clock on it all of a sudden. It's 9 o'clock in one camera angle, and then when the other camera angle switches over, it says 10 o'clock, and people notice those things. I was watching a movie recently, and I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? When the camera came from this angle, the person's glass was almost empty. When the camera angle switched to another thing to be able to shoot the other person's, their part of the dialogue, the glass is all full. And it would go back and forth, empty, full, empty, full, okay? They have people that are hired to make sure everything is the same from one camera recording to the next. And I've seen videos about that and how things look funny. Like in one scene, in one part of the scene, the guy's sitting at a desk. Okay. When it switches to view the second guy, he's looking up because somewhere along the line, the guy was standing at one point. So the guy's at his desk and the guy's looking up, and the people can tell it doesn't fit together. So if it takes that much work to make a movie scene together, and then you look at the Bible, they weren't trying. They didn't have that opportunity to say, oh, wait a second, let's make it say this over here because we got to make it agree. No, they just wrote things down. And so when you have those women testifying that Christ has risen, it's just raw dialogue, no monkeying around with things. Now, one of the things that that they pointed out was that women's testimony was not that significant. It was it didn't have as much value as a man's testimony. Okay, and that's what you have over in Islam today, by the way. Okay, Islam really puts women down, and the women don't know it. You know, I think they're kind of taken advantage of. If you have women go to court, you have to have 2 women to testify to something, but only 1 man has to testify to something. In other words, their testimony is only worth half as much. Well, as they pointed out in the movie, this was extremely important because they didn't monkey with the text in order to make it men going to the tomb. If they were interested in conspiring, they would have said, oh, we can't have women discovering Christ because nobody will believe it. Let's put a man in there so people will believe it more. No, this is a testimony to how they just wrote down what happened. And then they pointed out that if the women had all agreed, if all the Gospels were to agree in every detail, keep in mind, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, and they were writing from different angles and people they were talking to. If it agreed in every single aspect, that would become suspect. If you had a policeman, and this is probably very directly related to that guy that you like. Yeah. If you're a detective and somebody comes in and their story matches word for word what this other guy said, okay, it looks like, and you have 3 or 4 people matching exactly, that's not natural. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to mention that J. Warner Wallace is what they call a cold case detective. Investigates crimes that have been closed for years and they're not solved, and then he'll reopen the case. And a lot of times he doesn't have the eyewitnesses around because they may have died already. Key people may be gone. So he actually investigated the Bible and said, the gospel is the same way. He said, okay, I'm a cold case detective. I'm going to do that. And he came to the conclusion that Jesus is who he said he was, and that he's now a Christian, and he's been a Christian for many years. But the point is that whenever he's doing an investigation, not a cold case investigation, but an actual live investigation, the first thing he'll do, or the first thing he'll instruct the officers on the scene to do, is separate the witnesses. Because they don't want them talking, because even if they're not trying to make the story match, that's eventually going to be happening. Because what happens when you get together and you talk about what you saw? You're going to say things, and then next thing you know, oh yeah, I didn't notice that, but now you think you saw it, but you really didn't, and now everybody's stories are going to match. And that actually, the differences in the gospel is one of the things that told him that there's truth to this, because if they all matched, then yeah, you would have said, okay, they were either coached or they collaborated together and worked together. David Wood had a similar testimony when he was given the testimony in prison. He said one of the things that compelled him to believe that the gospel could be true, and I didn't know it at the time, but the fact that they didn't all say the same thing. You get 20 people in a room, they're never going to agree on everything. Right. 100%. You get 20 pastors in a room, good Bible preaching pastors, and they're not all going to agree on everything. So when you get that much agreement, it tells you either they talk to each other or they plotted together to make everything match.
Yeah. So you don't want to have absolute word for word agreement. This is a testimony of the fact that this was happening naturally. Look at page 56. Okay, one of the under progressive revelation. One of the great features of the Bible, as noted before, is that it was not written by one person or a committee who, by the limitations of human intellect, crafted a novel with a single plot, theme, and dialogue. It is God's word expressed through hundreds and hundreds of stories with different pieces spread throughout the Bible. So if you want to really see the whole story, you've got to keep reading. God designed it that way, and we talked about that before in one of our Bible discussions. God designed it this way to keep the Bible looking from being made by a committee. Okay, so theology is presented that way. Look at the scriptures here. Genesis 3:15. Okay, it talks about how there was going to be a virgin-born seed. Then all the way in Isaiah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Okay, we're going to get up to Isaiah sooner or later. All those many books later, Isaiah says in verse 14, "Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." There you have it again. Okay, but it's like a couple of, like about 1,000 years later that Isaiah is writing this. God is putting these things in different places. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 and 7 talks about Christ becoming Christ as God. Jeremiah, now you skip over to the book of Jeremiah, and talks about the last line on the page there, "A woman shall compass a man." That's talking about the virgin birth of Christ. Well, Micah takes it up over in chapter 5 about Bethlehem Ephratah. There's a reason why it says Bethlehem Ephratah. There were two Bethlehems in Israel, okay? The one which was the city of David was the Bethlehem in Ephratah. Okay, Zechariah picks up on it. Malachi, Ezekiel, Zechariah. All these things are scattered around so that it can't look like it was manufactured. It was something that was given by God. Well, not any one prophet is given the whole message. Somebody has pointed out that prophecy is like the prophets looking out, and they see, they're seeing over a mountain range. Well, you can't see down in the valleys all that's going on. What you see is the tips of the mountain tops. And that's very much like the way prophecy is. They can see what's going on, but they can't see necessarily everything that's going on between time. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about where Christ was born. When Frank Sinatra was trying to make his name in the world of entertainment, I'm not recommending Frank Sinatra and Gordon Allen. He would always tell people he was from New York City. He was actually from Hoboken.
Yeah.
Hoboken was like a little nothing city. So, to make yourself seem more important, you tell people you come from a bigger place. If men were scripting the Bible, Jesus would have been born in Jerusalem.
Oh, yeah.
And he would have been born as a king, not as a lowly son of a carpenter in Bethlehem. So, whenever Hollywood takes something, any simple story, they always Hollywoodize it. And if men were going to write the Bible, if it were merely men writing the Bible, they would have done something.
Okay. So dispensations. Dispensations are, it's like an economic time period. How did God work in that time period? How did he dispense? You know what I mean by dispense? If I'm dispensing pills, okay, yeah, I would give you, one pill for each day for 10 days. Let's say if you had an antibiotic, and I would dispense the pills to you. Well, God has a way to dispense things in an organized way throughout all of history. This is going to be important when you're doing Bible interpretation. You want to look at what's going on in the Bible in the context of the whole Bible, how it fits in. And looking at dispensations gives you that kind of organization. As I said at the beginning, it's easy to look back at history and organize it when it's in the past. When it's in the present, when they were undergoing history, they couldn't quite see it all. I look at the book of the Revelation, and the book of the Revelation, you have the 7 churches. 7 churches are very interesting, but now with the benefit of looking back on church history, I can say, oh, those 7 churches that appear at the beginning of the Revelation was not just the Apostle John, as I like to say, giving a shout out to his homies. Hey there, Laodiceans. Hey there, Ephesians. How you doing, buddy? No, he wasn't doing that. Those churches, they represented time periods of church history. And we can see it in that organized way. It wasn't just that the Ephesians lost their first love. They started losing their love for Christ, and there was, getting where they were taking things for granted. Yeah, they did that, but that's because in that church age, the very first church age, there were, even just with the apostles there were false teachers that were creeping in to the church and compromising and ruining things. And so that's the Ephesian age. And when we see the next church, Thyatira, having a problem with Sardis, having a problem with 10 persecutions. That actually happened. We can see that. Did the believers along with the Apostle John, did they say, oh, we're going to have 10 persecutions that the church is going to go through? They probably looked at that as, oh yeah, persecutions, there's going to be persecutions, but they didn't know there was going to be 10 of them, just like it talks about 10 problems for the church of Sardis. And so each church age would have its own things happening. Well, when you look at the Bible dispensationally, you can say, well, this is how God worked in that age, and then this is how God worked in this age. Quick, grab some Bibles. Everybody get a Bible. I want you to look at Acts chapter 17. Acts chapter 17. Acts chapter 17. Since you all got the same Bible, somebody shout out the page number when you get it. 1557. They're all the same from the auditorium. Acts chapter 17. Now, when I go to read this verse, I want to point out, do we still sacrifice animals today? Did God command to sacrifice animals? Yeah, okay. Why don't we sacrifice animals today? We have the perfect sacrifice, Jesus Christ. Okay, that's dispensationalism. So you're in Acts chapter 17, and the Apostle Paul is he's preaching to these philosophers on Mars Hill in Athens, and he says in verse number 30, and the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commandeth all men everywhere to repent. Now, it would take me quite a bit to go through the logic of this, but let me just tell you the conclusion. Okay? Just like when we were playing that game last night and you got winked at, you just got assassinated. Okay, so here God is. It was a game they played last night. So here God has a thing where He winked at. When you wink at something, it has the idea of indicating that, yeah, it's not quite the way you think. If I said, um, I gotta make this up. Let me see. If I said Emmanuel, okay. Okay, if I said, Emmanuel, I'm getting together to play with, have a playtime on Saturday, I would go wink, wink, okay? Because that's my euphemism for saying we're going to have a work day. I call it play instead. Wink, wink, Yeah, I'm just fooling when I say play. We're actually going to work hard. Okay, so to wink at something means to sort of overlook something. I'm getting you to overlook the use of my word play, and what I really mean is work. When it's talking about God winking at things here in verse number 30, what happened was in the Old Testament times, when somebody died, they did not go to heaven. Okay, they went into a compartment of hell. You had two compartments in hell. One was the place of burning fire. The other was the place where the righteous dead would go. So Abraham went there, and it was called Abraham's bosom. And we get that from Luke 17, where you have Lazarus and the rich man die, and one wakes up in the burning hell. The other one wakes up in the bosom of Abraham, and he's in paradise. And the guy over in the burning hell, he looks over, he sees Lazarus over there, and he's like, oh man, can you send Lazarus to dip his finger in some water and touch to my tongue, because I'm tormented in this flame? And Abraham says to him, no, it can't happen. There's a gap between us, and you can't cross over from here or from here to there, so you can't do that. Okay, so then when Christ was on the cross in Ephesians chapter 4, it talks about when he died, he first went into the lower parts of the earth, and he led captivity captive. All the righteous dead, like Abraham and Lazarus and Moses and all those people, they were being held captive in that paradise. In fact, Jesus said to the thief on the cross, today you shall be with me in paradise. They were being held captive in paradise, waiting for the crucifixion and the sacrifice that Christ would make. Then he led captivity captive out of there and took them to heaven. Okay, so in Israel was not a very godly nation. In fact, they had problems with idolatry and just all kinds of disobedience. It was all over the place that they had this. Okay. But all you had to do to belong to the work of God, I'm being careful, I'm saying it very specifically, to be part of the work of God in that day, all you had to do was to be born a Jew or convert to Judaism. Okay? Some of those who were born Jews, they were on their way to hell. They never made it into heaven because they were into idolatry and they died in their sins and they went to the burning hell. Okay? But the other ones had to wait until Christ made the sacrifice. So, in that time period, God winked at all those who were part of his work, whether they were sinners or believers. They were all part of his work. Now, since Christ was resurrected, you want to be part of the work of God? You have to be a believer. Okay? We don't let unbelievers become members of the church here. No church does that. Well, no real church anyhow. And even the false churches, they make people, at least adhere to the principles so they can have them come in. But in churches, God is now, to be part of God's work, you have to repent. Before that time, no, you didn't have to repent. All you had to do was be born a Jew. And that was sufficient. Well, you had that dispensation that's obvious where you had Israel with the law and They had sinners and believers that were part of the nation. In the next dispensation, the way God dispensed his justice and dispensed his work and made his work happen, this is the church age. It's actually called the age of grace. You have to be a believer to be part of the work at this time. Well, what if you're in a time period before Israel was formed? Because Israel was not always there with the law. What happened before then? Well, you would expect, by extension, that if you have a dispensation of the law and you have a dispensation of grace, there would be other dispensations. Let's pick it up on page 58. God would give progressive revelation. He would give a little bit at a time and a little bit of commands for somebody to fulfill during each age. Mankind would mess it up. They would fail. God would have a judgment, and then they would move on to the next dispensation where God would give some more revelation, and there would be more requirements that would be placed on people. So it's like from the time of Adam all the way up through the millennium, you have these different time periods, these different dispensations of how God was working. The first one is called the Age of Innocence. Now, by the way, I am listing 7 dispensations here. Are there 7 dispensations? I know for sure there's 2, and then maybe a third one. I can maybe make a case for a fourth one. And some of them maybe start to overlap a little bit, maybe in the way they appear. But essentially, 7 is a nice number. Okay, 7 is the number of perfection in the Bible. And so you have 7 days in a week, right? And then you had in the Jubilee years, it would be a period of 7 sevens every in the 50th year, right after the 49th, they'd have a year of Jubilee, and so the number 7 works out really good. What's the number 6 represent? Okay, the mark of the beast, because it is the number of man. Okay, we have the number 6 because we're less than God. We're less than 7. That's why he gets the number 666. Okay, so because you have the unholy trinity. Okay, so what happens is 7 is a pretty good number, and it fits really good. Some people have, maybe a little bit less dispensation. Some people a little bit more. It's not like you see in the Bible. This is the dispensation of such and such. Yeah.
So if you're a man of God, wouldn't that be 6 7?
So maybe. Okay. 6 7, a man of God. Okay. So how do we break it down? The first one is pretty obvious, the age of innocence. That's the time when Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, and they were innocent. They had not sinned yet. They had one human responsibility. Okay, read it on the page there in bold. Under innocence, you have administration. God governs directly over Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, providing them with a state of innocence and freedom. Their responsibility, their human responsibility, was to care for the garden, to have children, and don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay, God's revelation was his commandment not to eat from the tree. Okay, so this was the test, to obey God's command regarding the forbidden tree. Their failure, what did Adam and Eve do? They ate from the forbidden tree. The judgment, humanity was expelled from Eden, bringing sin and suffering and death into the world. Okay, so you had that. That was a clear age where if you wanted to be part of the work of God, you had to be Adam and Eve, and you had to not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and just enjoy working in the garden. So next comes the age of conscience. Why is it called the age of conscience? Is because now man knows the difference between good and evil. Okay, he's got his conscience witnessing against him when he does something wrong. His conscience bothers him. He's like, oh man, I'm stupid. What did I do that for? That's the age of conscience. This covers from the fall to the flood, from the fall of man to the flood. What happens at the end of that age of conscience? How does man prove that his conscience was not helping him? It sins again. Well, okay, in a worse way, the thoughts and intents of his heart were only evil continually. Everybody screwed it up. They all failed. Mankind, except for Noah and his sons, God was going to spare them. Everybody was only evil continually. I got to say, you've got a bunch of years ahead of you, unless if Jesus comes back real soon, which could happen. One of the things that has bothered me living so long is when as I'm dealing with more problems and I'm doing more and more analysis of everything, people are wicked. I cannot believe how wicked people are. Disgustingly wicked. You're not exposed to that so much, okay? And the only reason why you're not exposed to it is nobody's trying to hide it. You just haven't lived long enough. I'll always say that, okay? You're at the beginning of your life. You're going to see how terrible people are. I'll have people, their stupidity just amazes me. Oh, I believe all men are basically good. No, they don't get out much. They don't see much. The more you start seeing what's going on in the world, there is it is just terrible. I'm glad that we have as much goodness as we do, but you can go into places and what they're doing in some of these other countries where they don't have Christianity that has held them in check. They are just torturing and just, taking people as slaves, and this is what's happening in Nigeria. They're killing the Christians, taking the girls, forcing them into slavery. Yeah.
I have a question for Noah's Ark.
Okay.
So Noah made the ark. How they have food and water? How they feed the animals?
They put it in store. Now, one of the things that will happen in a storm like that they went through is animals will go into a sense of hibernation. So the conditions on the ark itself would balance out the food supplies that they had. And so then you would have the work of God to keep the animals in check. So God in his plan created the ark in such a way that it would sustain them. One of the things that would be great to do if you ever get a chance to go out to, well, it's Kentucky but that's where the ark is. Okay, and then the Creation Museum is over in Cincinnati, I think, which is right close to Kentucky. Yeah, they have an actual built to specifications ark that's out there, and you can see how God could have worked that out. It's a great field trip. Let's all go there this summer, okay? We'll go on a team field trip, okay? All you need is, Kentucky. Yeah, so it takes them a little while to get out there. Okay, so the failure, humanity becomes increasingly wicked, corrupting itself with violence and sin. The judgment, remember, there's always the same pattern. The judgment is God sends the flood. Well, then God sets up human government. He says at the beginning, after the flood, he says that if any man sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. In other words, we have capital punishment, which is execution. If you kill somebody, you're supposed to be executed, unless if it's accidental, and there's some different variations on that. Huh? Yes, and life for a life. Well, yeah, would be life for a life. Okay, so that's the ultimate. That's the ultimate responsibility of man, is to be responsible for man. That is what government is all about. Government has that job. We as a church don't have that job. Our job is to turn the other cheek and to forgive. That's the job of the church. Now, if people won't operate within the church and have forgiveness, that's where government steps in. So if somebody goes and tries to shoot Charlie Kirk, he should be given the death penalty. And that's all there is. Now, Erica Kirk, she forgave him. She was operating under the Christian principle, and she said, I don't hope for the government, I don't hope for him to be killed. She said, that's for the government to work on. She was going to operate by the Christian principle of forgiving.
I heard there's a rumor saying that Eric was trying to marry someone else.
It's possible, it's until death you depart. Okay, so you have human government, and in fact, Nimrod, who's back at that time, he became a hunter of men. He was a political hunter. He was, doing assassinations and things like that. Nimrod. He tried to have in the Tower of Babel a rallying place for people, and God said, no, this is not the way government's supposed to work. I told you to spread out all over the earth. So he gives them confusion of their languages, so they have to disperse. But that was them trying to do government the wrong way. So that becomes the end of the human government period. It was at the end of that Abraham is called. And this is called, on page 59, the dispensation of promise. Abraham didn't have the 10 commandments, okay? He had a promise that he was going to be given the land. The failure is that they end up moving down to Egypt because of the famine, and they fall into bondage to a not so good Pharaoh. Okay, so that was the judgment that was given to them. Then you have the time of the law. That's where you get the sacrifices now. Now, by the way, you had sacrifices before then too, but now you have the sacrifices according to the law. And they stopped when Jesus Christ became the ultimate sacrifice. Well, their failure, they didn't keep the law, they kept breaking the law, they worshiped idols, and they fell into apostasy. Israel was judged through exile and captivity. They had the captivity. And then this sets up the time for the age of grace. That's the age that we're in. The age of grace, it means that God was supposed to go from Israel straight to the millennium. But there was an area that was not known about, and that was where you had churches for these last 2,000 years. So God has graciously given mankind some more opportunity. This age of the church is going to fail. Okay, we're seeing it already. I mean, this is what I was doing church history about on Sunday afternoons, was to say that all along the way, the church was doing good off and on, and we had some wonderful times. There's going to come a time where people are going to fall into a lot of disbelief, and we might be seeing that time right now. The churches are going to end up not being successful. They're going to end up not converting everybody, and in fact, you're going to have more wickedness, and we're seeing that now. Okay, I'd like to think, okay, we can get everybody saved. Now, what's going to happen is we'll see some people getting saved and things like that, but ultimately people are going to turn away from church. I complain right now because 40 years ago, when I was first here, I would go out with candy and gums. I'd go out to the playgrounds and I would say, "Hey, you want some gum? Hey, you want to come to church? Here, take me to your mom." Why did they let their kids play without supervision? I guess it was safer then. Now, if you know what happens if I were to go out with candy now? "Hi, kid, you want some candy? Okay, want to see my puppy over in the car here?" Yeah, I'd go to jail. Okay, so I can't do that. But I'll go to, and we would have kids, an awful lot of kids in Sunday school. We would go out and pick them up because their stupid parents wouldn't bring them. So now we'll go out and we'll approach parents and we'll say, "Hey, I see you have kids there. I'd like to invite you to Sunday school." We'll tell people, you can sit in on the Sunday school class. That'll make Maya feel real comfortable having all these parents staring at her and criticizing her. Okay? But they'll get the Word of God, too. Parents are not bringing their kids. Parents are not, because your parents are, and grandmother, because they are encouraging you to church, they are not the stupid parents, they're the good parents, okay? Because they're trying to make sure that you've got that opportunity. I got so many other people out there, it just boggles my mind. So we're seeing less faith. And we're going to be converted over to probably what you have over in Europe, where, I mean, there's a horrendous problem with Muslims all over the world right now because everybody's opening their borders and they're inviting these people in, and they have no intention of merging with the country. Okay, they want to establish the subjugation of countries. So there's a lot of problems out there. Okay. The final dispensation on page 60 is the millennium. The millennium is that final 1,000-year reign of Christ. Okay. And don't you know, mankind is still going to blow it, even though they have Christ for 1,000 years reigning over them. The failure is that the end of the millennium, Satan will lead many to rebel against Christ's rule under his influence. God will have the final judgment, okay, destroys the rebellious forces, cast Satan into the lake of fire, and then will be the final judgment of all humanity. Now, at each stage of the game, there's more revelation given. There's more prophecies about Christ that are given so that we could have more and more knowledge. We here today are more responsible than people of 2,000 years ago. Why? We've had 2,000 years of Bible study that we've been able to engage in. We can look back at all these men who have studied and studied and studied, had written and written and written. Some were wrong here, some were right there. When you go over it all, we have resources like crazy. How many Bibles are in your home today? If you had to take a guess, how many?
Including your Bible?
Yes, including any Bibles. About how many would you say might be in your home?
5.
At least 5. How many in your home probably? Yeah. Do you know about how many Bibles might be in your home if you had to take about the same thing in your home? What would you say? 4. Okay. Up in my office, I have a stack of Bibles like this. No, about like this. Now, I have to say they're not all true Bibles. Huh?
What would be from the stick?
A stick?
Stack.
Oh, no, a stack.
Oh.
Not a stick, a stack. Okay. They are different versions that I use for comparison. Whenever I go to show, you remember I've taken the Bibles out and I've said, look at Acts 8:37, and everyone's like, it's not there. It's not there. Okay. But throughout my home, I don't know if I would be able to count because all the Bibles that I've set aside because they were falling apart, okay, the different study Bibles that I might have, there's like Bibles all over the place in the home. We have got so much Bible, it's ridiculous. There are places in the world, in fact, Nancy was just looking at this one video, and it might show up in the ladies' time, where the guy's talking about how, I can't remember what country they were in, but the one lady gave her Bible to somebody else to read, and there was a question about it. And it turns out that the first lady had memorized those chapters and had memorized more and more because they would only get pieces of the Bible before the government would try to confiscate them and take them away from people. So they had to memorize things as much as they could. We are so blessed. We have so much of an advantage that we have greater accountability. So you start off with Adam and Eve, no Bible whatsoever, okay? By the time of Moses, that's when the scholars think that Job was writing, and, Abraham. By the time of Abraham, Job was writing. That was the no Bible to look back to. David comforted himself in the Lord. He only had the first 5 books of the Bible to really look at. If anything, we have the whole Bible and we've got all this time. So God starts off, gives a little bit of responsibility. Man proves that he can't handle it. Gives him a little bit more responsibility. Man proves that he can't handle it. What is God doing here? What is the overall theme? The overall theme is that God is vindicating himself. He's giving man every opportunity. Man proves that he needs a Savior. No matter how much God gives man, man messes up, and that's proof that man needs a Savior. So that at the end of the millennium, we get launched off into eternity. There's no more sin whatsoever, no more sinners to worry about and to think about, and we're just going to enjoy God forever. And God will say, I told you so, okay? And that's what he did in the Bible. So when we're looking at bibliology, having this dispensational understanding will help you see how God is moving from one time period to the next. And I hear in some of the jerks that are out there that are criticizing the Bible saying, well, why does God say this? And why did it have this back then? My answer is, come to the theology class and I'll teach you all about dispensations, and then you'll get it. But they won't do that. And I'll just have to say, well, God was working this way at this time, and he gave more instructions as it would go along. And I can't say it, but I would like to say, because of stupid people like you. Okay, so dispensations is, keep in mind, there is a progress through the Bible. God set it up that way, and it happened naturally. The writers didn't know that this was happening, I'm pretty sure, but God knew what he was doing. Any questions? Okay. You got it? Was this good for you, I'm hoping? Good. Okay. See why I've been trying to get you out for, like, oh, come on, Tony, you can come along. Okay. Well, we got more to come. Okay. We are going to go into the next section, section 3. We're leaving bibliology. We're going to look at theology proper, and that's looking at the nature and attributes of God. You have theology in general, okay, but if you look at what the word theology means, it means the study of God. Well, we're going to study God himself in this next section. And you can see the significance of everything, because before you can study about God, you've got to be able to establish that the Bible is the Word of God. Once you do that, now you can say, well, what does the Bible say about God? Okay, very good. I need 12 muffins and 1 cake. I think a chocolate cake this time, if you would, please. I'm sorry? That's it, because we're having the potluck lunch tomorrow. So I just need 12 muffins. You can put your name in it and bring it back. So, okay.
If I buy a book, I can just give it back
I'll give you one. Just say thank you. It's yours. Okay. Is it? Yeah, and I'm going to work off of this one to match it up to that one. Tony, they do the meal preparation stuff, and you're welcome to do that too. I'd encourage to hang out with that, and then they're going to hang out some more, whatever you want to do. Okay.